Hi, welcome to the new normal. Once again, my plan now is to record this lecture and put it up for you on Tuesday evening, as I'm doing the first one tonight. Today is Sunday, actually. But this is scheduled to appear for a number of hours on Tuesday. The name of the series, as I'm sure you know, is Jews and Lithuanians, Glory, Horror, Revisionist History. Tonight is the second lecture out of 6. Entitled When Lithuania Was Polish, Jews in the Rzeczpospolita. I spelled that wrong. Rzeczpospolita. And tonight's talk is being sponsored by my good friends, the Berlins, aside from the fact that obviously that Herman is a Litvak. But I'll just make the following point. Usually, if not for the corona, we would be doing this series, this talk in Ner Tamid, which is a shul that was founded by his parents, among other people. So there's an interesting connection there, and I hope what we say today in the sponsorship will be tribute to their memories. Shama should have an aliyah. Herman's mom passed away not that long ago, actually. Not that long ago. So anyway, always grateful for all the sponsors. And without any further ado, here we go. As I said, tonight we're doing the second part, When Lithuania Was Polish, Jews in the Rzeczpospolita, which you'll see what that means soon. We left off last time. Let me begin my remarks by saying we left off last time at the beginning of the 1500s. It was during the 1500s that Lithuania, together with Poland, became the most important Jewish community in the world, period. Now, here I have to be clear, and I'm going to be doing this over and over again, started last time. What you and I today call Litvish is really, like Litvish culture, minhagim and all that, is really the general culture that once upon a time existed throughout Poland and Lithuania during the 1500s, the 1600s, and the 1700s, before the Hasidim and then the non-Frum came along and changed things, each one in its own way. Litvish, therefore, does not refer to the confines of the current Republic of Lithuania. You see the map of Eastern Europe today. And you see Lithuania is a small country in the upper left-hand side. And that is Lithuania, but it used to be a lot bigger. So when you say Litvish, let's go back one. When you go Litvish, it's a term that's going to be covering, looking at the map you're looking at, not only Lithuania and even Latvia, but also Belarus and Ukraine. That's pretty big. All right? Let's go to the next map. If you went to the old map, if you look on the right-hand side with the red, inside the red circle, shall we say, you see what I mean, that the whole Eastern Europe was part of the Republic of Lithuania, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Not Poland. Poland would be the light blue thing to the left of it. The big gray area, the big pinkish area that's surrounded by the red, that was the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. So it was the biggest country in Europe. Now last time, I started talking about the rulers, the royal family, the dynasty, in other words, that ruled Lithuania and Poland for a number of centuries. This dynasty was called the Jagellonios. They were Lithuanians. They became, through marriage, also the kings of Poland. So here you have a dynasty in which the rulers, no, let's go back for a second. The rulers go back in the 1300s, the 1400s, and 1500s, and they were Lithuanians, but because one of them married the princess of Poland, so for hundreds of years, when they became Grand Dukes of Lithuania, they were also elected kings of Poland. But they're two separate countries. Now this dynasty was good to the Jews, and particularly so in the period we're going to be covering, which is the 1500s. The two main kings in the 1500s, Sigismund I, we can go to the next one, and Sigismund II. I know they're not household names today, but they were among Jews once upon a time. And between them, look how long they ruled, almost 70 years. That's a long time. And they were very good friends to the Jews. Okay? Despite continual attacks on the Jews by the church and by the middle class, the two Sigismunds, father and son, protected the Jews, to the best of their ability. So if you want to get in the nitty-gritty, especially in Poland, every once in a while a riot would break out here and there. And there was a guy that was killed because of blood libel. It could happen here and there. But most of the time, listen, America's going nuts right now, right? There are bad things happening in this country. But most of the time, especially Jews could turn to the king for protection. And remember, I just told you, there are two countries. They're united by having the same king, Poland and Lithuania. It was worse in Poland than Lithuania. Lithuania was not so bad. This era, the 1500s, especially with these two kings, is called by historians the golden age of Polish history. Hear what I just said? Because these two kings, and you kind of look at them, were cultured, educated, westernized, in the best sense of the term. So during their time, Poland really was part of the West. They brought in a lot of Italian stuff in the Renaissance. If you go to Poland, Lithuania today, you see a lot of the architecture left over from the Italians. The country was flooded with books. The universities were flourishing. Believe it or not, this is going to sound funny, Polish scientists were at the cutting edge of technology. For example, you think of Copernicus, for example. And Poland was rocking, okay? So not only the Jews were doing good, but the Poles were as well, and the Lithuanians were as well. Now, the kings at that time were well aware that their empire, this large area of Poland, Lithuania, especially Lithuania, was religiously polyglot, and they had a religiously polyglot culture. All kinds of people there, Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, Muslims, they had Tatars there, all kinds of groups, and Jews. And, let me put it this way. The Lithuania part was particularly polyglot. The Poland part was a little more homogeneous. The Lithuanian part was really divided. You had Belarusians, you had Ukrainians, you had all kinds of Ukrainians. You had, as I said before, the Crimean Muslims, all kind of groups over there. And they realized that the fact that this kingdom of theirs has a lot of different religious groups and ethnic groups is potentially a help to the enemy, to the Russians. So they'll play one up against the other. And all during this time, let's go to the next one. The Russians were constantly at war trying to break in and conquer Lithuania. This is Ivan the Terrible and his father. That's one of the things they're famous for fighting and taking land away from Lithuania. I told you again, Lithuania was very large once upon a time. Not only are there different types of Eastern Orthodoxy, the Greek Orthodox and the Ukrainian Orthodox, and there's other groups, the Uniate, all kinds of different groups. But there was even the rise of Protestantism in this time. This is the time of Martin Luther. And there are a number of educated Poles who challenged the Catholic Church. A lot of them. They said, the Protestant argument against the Roman Catholic things is correct. And so as a result, you'd be surprised to see that Poland in the 1500s had a lot of these Lutherans and Calvinists and things like this. And so the country's very divided, which is a good thing for the Jews. All these led the kings to say, these two kings, the Sigismund 1 and 2, and 3, by the way, that even though we are from Catholics, and even though we totally support the Catholic Church, even though we as kings would prefer that the whole country, the entire kingdom and Grand Duchy were totally Catholic, we recognize that this is not the case. And it's not going to be the case. And so for the sake of the country, let's do tolerant. Now, that's happened in the 1500s. And again, that's good for the Jews, because if there's religious tolerance running around, it's going to be also religious tolerance for the Jews. Basically, if I'm George, I'm living in Lithuania, or Poland in the 1500s, I'm a Jew, this one's a Muslim, this one's a Protestant, this one's a Catholic, this one's a this, this one's a that. Now the Catholic Church and the strong Catholics, all through the 1500s, strongly disagree with the kings about this. And that's a lot of the domestic politics of the kingdom in the 1500s. The church is always pressing the king. You're being too easy on the Jews, being too easy on the Protestants, you're being too easy on this group and the other. Naturally, that's what Catholics are. The Jews, of course, their fate will be dependent on who got the upper hand. Had the Catholic Church totally triumphed, and the kings listened 100% to the Jesuits and the others, Jews would have been in a bad shape. But the politics was a lot more complicated than that, and there's a lot of back and forth on these issues in what's called the Golden Age of Poland and Lithuania. I'm not going to bore you with all the details. It's actually fascinating. That'll take us hours. Suffice it to say, the Catholic Church never got quite what they wanted. As I said before, if you're living in this part of the world, the main enemy is the middle class. In other words, the Gentile middle class. And the reason is simple. I want to have a store. I don't want a Jewish guy over there have a store like I have. He might undercut me. He might do better than I do. Right? I want to be the only one who sells bagels. Why should he sell the bagels, you know? I want to be the only one who is a shoemaker. Why should a Jew have a right to compete against me as a shoemaker, and so forth? So the middle class is the enemy of the Jews. The middle class is mostly located in the Poland part, not so much in the Lithuanian part. The Lithuanian part still is the nobles and the peasants. That was good for the Jews. You understand? Those they didn't have that much hatred and competition from middle class people. There weren't many middle class people. So if you're a Jew living in the empire that I'm talking about, you will find things better in the eastern part, the Lithuanian part, than in the Polish half. And that's what many Jews do. So not only did Jews move from Germany and places like that to Poland, but inside Poland they moved from Poland in large part to Lithuania, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, this huge area. Now there's still plenty of Jews left in Poland. There were. But a whole lot of Jews, and maybe the most, didn't live in the Poland half, but lived in the Lithuanian half, which is interesting. Now, as to the Jewish stuff, the exclusively Jewish stuff, listen closely. As I said, the Lithuanian half was better for the Jews than the Poland half. Although the Poland half, as bad as it was still much better than anywhere else in Europe. Okay? Now, the kings, as enlightened patriots, want to build up a normal kingdom. They want to have an army, a bureaucracy, like other countries. And the kings, in order to do that, got to get money. So they're always fighting with the parliaments to get funds. Parliaments don't want to give it to them. Makes sense. The kings, all of them, look and they say, listen, we've got a certain limited set of sources of revenue. We're not going to get what we want from the parliament. They always give us only half or something like that. So what do we have that's our revenue? And you have certain taxes, tolls, productive land that the kings own, things like that. So who are you going to give the administration of these sources of revenue to? The short answer is Jews. In the 1500s and 1600s, there's going to be Jews. The kings do not hesitate, even though they're strong Catholics, they do not hesitate to entrust these sources of revenue to Jews, converted and unconverted. I'll tell you something funny. Especially in the late 1400s, early 1500s, you had a lot of times, this is a strange story. You had a lot of times where you have a certain family, and let's say, for example, 3 brothers, and one will be Meshomit, will convert to Catholic, but the others will not. And the king will give the Catholic guy and his brothers the control of the customs duties or the tolls or the other sources of revenue. And it's weird because officially it was given to the Catholic brother, but really everybody knows the whole it's above board. It's not hidden. The whole family's using it and is operating this enterprise. And the firm branch is also getting rich. Okay? That's strange. I wonder what chassims were like and things like that. So they trust these Jews, first of all. Okay, I mean, let me put it this way. The King of Poland gave a Jew, an unconverted Jew, position of Secretary of Treasury of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. In the 1500s, this is unheard of. That's official position. Secretary of Treasury, run the whole money. You understand? Now, first of all, obviously they trust these Jews. You can't trust the Germans. You can't trust the Russians. You can't trust a lot of different groups because they'll help people on the outside. They won't be loyal to you. The Jews are loyal to you because the Jews have nowhere to go. And the Jews like it in Poland and Lithuania. They're grateful for the good treatment. And they'll be loyal to you because there's no outside power that they look to. Right? Which is true. And second of all, the Jews proved to be most efficient because they had to. If you're Jewish, you're competing. If you want to get the contract to run the tolls or the customs duties, the other people also want that contract. So they'll make a deal with the king and they'll say, you give it to me, and here are the numbers, and you'll make $1 million a year. Jewish guy has to come up with some scheme in which the king makes $1.5 million or something like that. You know, that's what you got to do. In order to do that, you have to run a business more efficiently. Now, I'm talking about not every Jew, a narrow stratum of the Jewish community, the top, 1%. Not everybody was like that. But if it's in the early 1500s, this narrow stratum includes now, for the first time, not just the old-fashioned, unlettered, ruthlessly capable Jew of the pre-Ashkenazic migration. In the 1200s, the 1300s, 400s, 1400s, you had these Jewish guys that were stark, tough businessmen. They were super frum. They were Amaratzim. They're Jewish. Yeah, they kept Shabbos, sort of. They kept Jewish customs, basically. They weren't, highly cultured, Jewishly or otherwise. They were businessmen. The old story, the guy can't write well, but they had a bunch of college grads working for him. But now in the 1500s, because a lot of Jews have moved here from Ashkenaz, from Germany, from the Holy Roman Empire, so now this stratum, upper stratum, includes a classier type. We're dealing now with the entry into Poland, Lithuania, and into Jewish history of the classic Ashkenazi scholar capitalist, the court Jew of culture as well as business smarts. No, not yet. Right? The guys who combine Torah Gedula b'Makom Echad. Okay? This is already a much more not yet. This is already a much more interesting phenomenon, one which will render the history of Jews in this part of Europe something special. Then it becomes interesting to us. So here you're dealing with a certain type, which you can think of in Ashkenazi Middle Ages. The Rabbeinu Tam, the Rosh, people like that. They're millionaires. How are they millionaires? They happen to be big in learning, obviously. In addition to that, they were also very successful in business. In the case of Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh, which are the two names that come to mind, there are others, they're very successful in the money lending business. So banking, as we call it today. Mortgages, things like that. So you got to know what you're doing, obviously. So in the case, as I said before, just off the top of my head, Rabbeinu Tam and Rosh, and some others, they're well-to-do, and more than well-to-do. They're also big gedolim. So that's a different type of rich person. You understand? It's not a guy who simply said like this: I sit in the front seat because I got more money than anybody else, and I make everybody dance. That we're familiar with throughout Jewish history. You got that in Baltimore today. So it's somebody who, as we say today, is the CEO of a major corporation and gives a daf yomi. As a matter of fact, more than that, he gives the sugya shir on the daf yomi. So you don't find too often. There is sometimes you find, but not too often. This you start to see in Poland. For example, King Sigismund I, who I showed you before, he appointed the father of Shalom Shachna, who's going to be a famous rabbi, Yosef. He appointed him early in the 1500s as director of the customs and the tariffs. This guy's in charge of collecting the money of all the goods that come into Poland, all over the country. That's a high degree of organizational skill required. And honesty. Okay? Now, this was an important source of revenue for the crown. I might remind you, if you know anything about American history, once upon a time, before the Constitution was changed, the only legitimate source of revenue, or the main source of revenue for the federal government, was tariffs, correct? The main source, tariffs. Now, this father, who was a frum guy, very tough business type, Yosef, he's an aristocratic Ashkenazic immigrant. What does that mean? Comes from money, and also a family that has relatives that were Talmidei Chachamim. He understands what Sfarim are. He wasn't a big Talmid Chacham, but he came from that stratum. He wanted his son, who was going to grow up as a lap of luxury, to have an elite education, as befitted his high status. This son is Shalom Shachta. But what does it mean to have an elite education if you're an Ashkenazic Jew in the 16th century, anywhere, and particularly in Poland? Does it mean you're going to send him to university? You're not going to send him to university. Besides which, university at that time, there were universities in Poland. The oldest university in Europe, just about, is the University of Krakow. It's a hotbed of anti-Semitism. But besides that, you're not going to send him to university, send him to yeshiva. Why? I'm an Ashkenazi Jew. I don't give a darn for the Geisha culture. I'm interested in my culture. They're entitled to have their culture. I'm also entitled to my culture. And my culture is superior to theirs. Well, that's the mentality. Anyway, I can buy and sell that university. You understand? And so, what does that mean? You'll give your son, if he's Shalom Shachta, the best education that private tutors can provide. And indeed, so in other words, the kid grew up, he was smart, he was a Baal Kishrin, as we say today. He had the best rebbes, class of one, treated with lap of luxury, and he grew up and became a gadol hador. No, don't be surprised if he was able to devote significant amounts of his time to mastering the Talmud, the Shas, the Poskim, and all the rest of it. He emerged as the biggest rabbi in Poland. And he became the rabbi in Lublin, which once upon a time the Jews were not even able to live in, now they were. But I want you to understand, he'll become a rav in Lublin, and he'll found the yeshiva there. He has more money than the whole rest of his community put together. That's not your typical rabbi. And what does that imply for Kavod HaTorah, Kavod HaRabbanos? You don't need to fundraise from anybody, okay? And this will become, by no means, unique as the 1500s and 1600s goes on in Poland and Lithuania, which is you don't find too often in other areas of the world, okay? You do find it here and there, but to have a whole bunch of them in one country, that's unique to Poland and Lithuania in 1600s. Matter of fact, this guy Shalom Shachno, I know he's not so well known to people who are listening to this lecture today. If you know anything about the history of Gedolim, I did a podcast not long ago. He's actually a very famous person once upon a time. He just didn't publish anything. So this Shalom Shachno and his family got so tight with the king, Sigismund I, that the king appointed Shalom Shachno chief rabbi of Gans Poland. Because that way the king figured it'd be easier for him to collect the taxes from the community. Not only that, he gave him superpowers. I appoint you chief rabbi of the kingdom of Poland with the power to impose whatever chayav miso. You can kill people. You have the right to impose capital punishment, torture, anything else. And that's what the king would consider to be a big favor, and it was. Now, you don't find too often in history a gadol hador being given dictatorial power if he chooses to use it by the Gentile authorities. And indeed, he used it maybe too much, too little. It's famous that he took a guy he would consider a Malshin in the former Jewish community. I'm talking about Shalom Shachna, did this, and he blinded him and cut out his tongue, which is like the days of the Rajba. In other words, they followed, what's the right word to use? Not Talmudic law, but they followed martial law, which they felt they're entitled to use. This happens once in a while in history. So Shalom Shachna is a famous case. Now, Shalom Shachna's star pupil, because he had a big yeshiva, it's like Harvard, like Volozhin. So, who was his best student? Somebody exact same background. That's the Ramah. He ended up marrying Shalom Shachna's daughter, Rosh Yeshiva's daughter. Who's the Ramah? Well, the Ramah's father is Israelist. His father's Isser, right? Was a rich Jewish merchant, a court Jew. He also got in tight with King Sigismund. He also, I forget exactly what contract the king gave him. And again, Israel wants his son to have an elite education. He's the richest guy in town. He wants his son to have the best education. But he wants an Ashkenazic elite education. And so again, you get the best tutors. And again, the kid is a Baal Kishon. As a result, you get the Ramah. Okay? Notice the father got what he wanted. He wanted his son to have the biggest chashivas in Poland. He did. He wanted to be the gadol hador. He did. He wanted to have the highest respect and all the rest of it, and be the biggest yichus and the best aristocracy. He got it, right? He got it through Torah scholarship, meaning the Ramah earned it. But I'm just saying he had a head start in life. Now my point is, because this could be, if I wanted to spend here an hour going through names, which I'm not going to do, I could, besides Shalom Shachna, Ramah, you have the Levush, you have many others like that. My point is that these Ashkenazic elites brought their frum scholarship culture with them and used their connection with the king and other VIPs to set up a parallel cultural universe which rapidly became the hallmark of Jewry in this empire. In plain language, Poland and Lithuania became the Iker Makom Torah in the world. The Iker Makom Torah in the world. Because there are plenty of Jews with money. And these Jews were willing to bankroll yeshivas and that sort of thing. Because in the subculture they created, Godlus B'Torah brought much social capital. And an environment was created that, in the words of the famous description in Nathan Hanover in the Yevei Metzulah, which he published in 1650, right after the Khmelnytsky massacres, take a look at this. That's what I mean by Torah scholarship equals social capital. Here's Nathan Hanover, writing immediately after the Chmielnicki massacre. He said, "Oh, what it was like in Poland. Anybody who was Rosh Yeshiva had supreme prestige. He's the first one to leave shul on Shabbos. Nobody dares leave without him. As a sign of respect. So in other words, the fact that everybody stays sitting while he leaves with his students is a sign of respect. It's understood that this Rosh Yeshiva, when he leaves shul, everybody follows him and walks in a respectful way, accompanies him to his house. And everybody in every yontiv would go to Rosh Yeshiva's house to pay respects. And as a result of this social prestige, all the scholars were jealous, and they wanted to attain this. Notice, this created an ambition. An ambition of people. I want to be Rosh Yeshiva too and get all the covet. But you learned the mitzmidas and made a learn up a storm. Now shalol lishma, but nevertheless, I'm trying to show you they create an environment. We have this a little bit today, in which people say, "I want to learn up a storm, so I'll be a big chashuv person." Sheyavo gam kein lemala zuli is Rosh Yeshiva basic hila. I want to reach the level of being a Rosh Yeshiva. When we talk shalol lishma, bol lishma, molar tzedea. And the result of all this was that even though it's shalol lishma, but eventually reaches lishma. As the Rambam puts it very famously, person says, "I want to learn to get the covet." Hopefully, somewhere along the line, the learning itself, the Torah that you studied, makes you realize maybe the covet ain't the thing to be the purpose of the learning. But nevertheless, they created a culture, an environment, which I could have a perfect storm. It's not the right word. We had a dynamic energy in which people want to excel in Torah study, let's be very exact, in Gemara study. Right? In Gemara study. So, this is unusual. Now, as a result, no other country in 15, 16, or 1700s, or 1800s, and first half of 1900s, no other country had this quantity of Gemara learners. Be very direct. Again, from the same book. Poland, this is written in 1651. That there wasn't a house that didn't have somebody who was learning. Either the Balabashan house, or Beno, or Chasana Lamdim, or son, or son-in-law was living with them, were learning, were scholars, or maybe a local yeshiva boy who eats lunch with them or breakfast with them every day. And not infrequently had all of them together. In other words, the yeshiva boy eats lunch Wednesday at home of a rich guy. The rich guy's a Talmud Chacham. The rich guy's sons are Talmud Chacham in learning. The sons-in-law. And so, no, let's put it this way. When they have lunch on Wednesday afternoon or Shabbos lunch or something like that, there's a lot of intellectual stuff going back and forth because they're all holding and learning. By Mekayim called Divul Rosham Rob Sechut Shabbos, and it was a fulfillment of the famous statement in the Gemara in Shabbos, which says, "Amarav the Rachim Rabban have been Rabban, and those who respect Chacham, their children become Chacham. The Mokar Rabban Havili Chamsa Rabban, or their sons-in-law become Rabban, scholars. Dacham Rabban Gufi Tzur Rabban, or you yourself. Lachin Hoya B'chol Kehila Kehila Harbi Chachamim." And the result was the creation of a large quantity of Gemara learners. The people knew this stuff. If you had a community of 50 balabatim, 50 taxpayers, that's what that means. If you had a community with 50 taxpayers, what you and I would call today middle class. Typically 20 out of the 50 would have smicha. Higher smicha, lower smicha. Rosh Yeshiva Kulan, and the top guy in the community would be a Rosh Yeshiva. Everybody was, subservient towards him, the greatest respect. And they would attend the shir that's the old-fashioned Hebrew. They would attend the public shir that was given. So in other words, imagine a town in Poland, or Lithuania is even more accurate, in 15, 16, 1700s. This is a small town. They might have a local learning situation, yeshiva of some sort. And the shir klali, as we call today, the public lecture would be, let's say, Tuesday morning. Everybody drops anybody who's shayach to the parsha, as we say. There's anyone who had a scholarly background whatsoever, an education, would close the store, and from 10 to 12, for example, would go to the yeshiva building, or would held in a synagogue, And this public lecture on some Gemara topic would be attended by everybody. Now I repeat, this is a middle class phenomenon. It didn't really apply to the poor, with exceptions. But the middle class is a very important element in Polish-Lithuanian Jewry in these centuries. That's my point. Our parents and grandparents and ancestors did not live necessarily a poor lifestyle in Eastern Europe. That came much later in history. This time, the general economic situation was much better. And out of a great quantity, if you have a lot of people learning, you'll get quality. Agreed? So if you have a large number of people learning the Gemara, some of them at least will turn out to be scholars of quality. And the result was that in these centuries, this is why in Jewish history, we refer to this more or less the golden age of Polish Jewry, which really means Polish-Lithuanian Jewry. You have a whole galaxy of famous rabbi names, if you want. Enough for 100 podcasts. You know, between the Shach and the Taz and the Sma, all the people who wrote in the Shulchan Aruch, right? The Ramah, the Levush, the Bach, the Pri Megadim, and go on, right? Prisha, Drisha, you know, Kalkas, Mechalke. I'm not going to just spread out names one after another. How come there are rabbis in Poland? Or Poland, Lithuania? How come you open a page of the Shulchan Aruch? Everybody lived in Poland. Aren't there people in Italy? Aren't there scholars in Turkey? You know, what happened? Get over it. Poland became the number one place because you had this large quantity, and out of the quantity came a quality. Now, we're talking, therefore, about a set of communities culturally characterized by this culture which generated an Ahavas HaTorah, became part of the culture. The mothers, the fathers, everybody wants to instill in the children, as we try today, honestly, an Ahavas HaTorah, which was not the case in Jewish communities around the world. There were some places that had like that. Other places, the Jews are just living hand to mouth. They're pretty doggone ignorant. It's not their fault. Maybe it's persecution. Maybe economic circumstances were bad. All kind of reasons. But, you know, their life was a much less scholarly life and all the rest of it. There was a rabbi to run, you know, the affairs of the community. You know what I mean? The religious stuff, maybe a beis din. That's it. Everybody else is ignorant. That is very common. Not in Poland, not in Lithuania. There, you have a rabbi, you have a beis din, you have a kahil, all the rest of us we'll see. But there's a whole bunch of other people that know how to learn quite well. Which, by the way, cannot help most of the time to cannot help create a better rabbinate. Because let's say I want to be a rabbi in a community. Let's just say. I know if I'm going over there, I can't get away with anything because the people there might know more than I do. I got to be on the top of my game. If I give a share and make a dumb mistake, my whole credibility to be shot. And so that encourages a higher class of scholar. It's just interesting, this community. Now, mind you, I don't want to create overly right picture. Still a ton of ignoramuses in Poland, don't worry. The masses of Jews didn't know anything. There's still plenty of problems in Jewish life. Even at the yeshiva curricular level, this is when you had the great criticisms of the Pilpul system that was around at that time, which I'm not going into today. And the rich sticking it to the poor, that you always have. And the other social ills that one can find described in explicit and lurid manner. All the Lashon Hara. In the writings of the Kli Yakar and the Zera Beirach, these are the famous social critics at that time. The Kli Yakar and the Zera Beirach. Talk about all that was going wrong in Jewish life. But there was also a lot that was going right in Jewish life. And overall, it was an impressive era, an impressive moment in Jewish history. And the king didn't mind. He didn't say, well, look, the Jews are setting yeshivas and schools and this and the other. But the king didn't bother the king. After all, the Jews are not interfering in Polish culture. They're not interfering in Lithuanian culture. They're creating their own subculture. And by the way, Polish culture was not suffering during that time. I thought it was a golden age. Lithuanian culture is actually on the decline in the wake of Polonization. The 1600s, I've said this before and I'll say it a number of times before I'm done, is characterized by the Lithuanians losing their culture. They get Polonized, Polishized, as you'd say, Polonized. And this will be a problem in the 19th and 20th century. But the people did it voluntarily, and so they didn't perceive themselves as suffering. And so, what I can say is the Gentile culture is flourishing. It's not hurt by the fact that the Jews have a parallel culture which is flourishing as well. Now, in addition to this, there's a very fascinating spin out in the political level. Because the emergence of what's a broad stratum of Jews who have money and are entrepreneurs, because that's what eventually happens. There's not only a few Shalom Shachnas out there that control the customs and the tariffs, that you always have. But there develops, as I'll hope to explain in a minute, I think I've explained in the past in an earlier series, there will develop a whole stratum, not a small one, of Jews who end up locating themselves within the economy of the Polish nobles who owned everything, and therefore made money. And so you had not a small number of Jews who were pretty well off. And that's what I mean by middle class. So this provided the country, the Jewish community there, with Jews who have money and are entrepreneurs, and therefore they have a leadership class, which is not craven, it's not fawning like that, but the opposite. They're very proud. They're very proud. I'm Jewish. I live in Vilna, or in Grodno, or in Krakow. I'm not a Christian, that's true, and it's their country, no question about that. And the nobles have all the power, and I'm under their control, the king. But having said that, I'm Jewish, I do well, and the truth of the matter is I live better than someone else. That's the truth. I live better than massive others out there. And I represent a proud culture. I'm not Polish, I'm Jewish living here. You know what I said? There's no pretense that I'm Lithuanian by ancestry or ethnicity. There's no question about that. I'm a foreign group living over here. And if I'm a religious Jew, I figure tomorrow the Mashiach is coming. But meanwhile, I'm here. And my community is uninferior to any other community any other way. And if I deal with the king or anybody else, even though you're not arrogant, but you're not fawning and bowing and like that. And this expresses itself, fascinatingly, in a proud public Jewish politics. Over the course of the 1500s, the Jewish leaders and communities began creating real kehilos at local levels, as in cities and towns, particularly in those Jewish communities in which they were able to get royal charters from the king. Because a lot of times they would move to a town, and the locals, which had a middle class, tried to prevent that, and tried to combine Jews to a ghetto, and tried to say Jews can't go into this business and that business. And Jews would fight it in the courts, especially with the king. And they would get charters from the king. And the king would say, over and over again, leave the Jews alone. It's better for the general economy that they can compete and be part of it. It'd be good for, in other words, they had a very enlightened capitalist way of looking at things, mercantilist, and get the heck off the back of these Jews. Now, once these communities were established, Krakow, Lublin, Poznań, Grodno, Brisk, Vilna, once these communities were established, they became strong institutions, and they slowly but surely began organizing the smaller Jewish communities on a regional level, which is the same thing that the Poles and Lithuanians did. So in other words, let's say, for example, I'm in Krakow, which is the capital of Poland, and you end up with a Jewish community. In the 1400s, the anti-Semites were able to get one of the rulers to confine the Jews to a ghetto, but it turned out not to be a ghetto, Kazimierz. It turned out not to be a ghetto, it turned out to be a nice neighborhood of the city. So it's something, it's not the same thing, but it's something like, suppose I said all the Jews in Baltimore have to live in Upper Park Heights and Green Spring, and I don't know, something like that. Not the end of the world. There are worse places to live in Baltimore, right? In Italy, they say all the Jews in Baltimore have to live in five streets, and suffer the consequences. That's not the case at all. Now, once Krakow was established as a separate community, they're in villages near Krakow, and they would say like this: there's a small Jewish community. Let's say there's one little shul in this village, and another shul in that village, and 10 or 20 families in this place. I say, okay, now let's organize ourselves so that for purposes, let's say, for example, of kashrus, of mechiras chametz, of mikvahs, of things like that, you're all part of the broad Krakow kehillah. And then, when we deal with the government, we're negotiating not only on behalf of the Jews living in Krakow proper, but also to the 10, 20, 30 villages or small towns, or 40, that are in the general area of a 20-mile radius, for example. And just multiply that all across the kingdom that you see in the map in front of you. You're in Kiev, you're in Vilna, you're in Grodno, you're in Poznań, you're in Lublin, and so forth, right? Lemberg, place like that. So this is what the Poles did. The Poles that you see on the map over there, and I keep having to correct myself. It's a Hebrew map. Ha'Ichud HaPolani Litai. It's the combined Poland-Lithuania, right? So the darker color is the Lithuania. In those places, the Gentiles organized themselves the same way. You had a community, then you had a regional one called dietines, and then they would send delegates with instructions, written instructions, to the central one for the whole nation. The Jews copied this. And the kings were okay with this, I repeat, because it made taxation easier. They said if all the Jews in Poland, or if all the Jews in Lithuania get together, and we come up with a lump sum that we both agree with, makes my life easier. Because I'll say like this, you Jews, you figure out how you get the money, but I need $10.5 million by January 1. That's after a process of hammering it out. And he probably started out by saying 20 million, and Jews said, no, we said 5 million. But by the time you finish, you agree on 10.5, let's say, for example. He will get that money from the Jews in one lump sum on January 1 or June 1, whatever date was described. So I'm glad that you guys dealt with the administrative part of this, and you figured out how to apportion the taxes among your own communities, and leave me alone. So rulers in general like top-down organizations, is that true? The leaders in the communities, obviously, it's the 1500s, the 1600s, with the richie riches. They say like this, we got all the money, therefore we should control everything. This is where you get Kliyuker territory. Theoretically, if the rich paid most of the taxes, so then you might say they have a right to, maybe, you have a right to have the say, to control. It's not so simple. They're fascinating response letters, Shaus and Shuvas, Tzemach Tzedek and others, who say, listen, the poor people, even though they pay less, it's a bigger sacrifice. You know what I'm saying? No, the guy says, I pay full tuition. So I should have the right to say what happens in the school, to use modern example. No, it's like this. I pay half tuition, but the half tuition is 2/3 of my income. Your full tuition is, 1/20th of your income. So do you go by the it's not simple. That's what I'm trying to say. But that simply means that there was a Jewish politics. There was a real Jewish life, a real kehilas. They exist on a legal level. And you have the regular fights about economics and taxation. So rich people run the show, and Rabbanim. Because you need to run it according to the halacha. That's the kind of culture that emerged. And of course, the rabbi is always going to be pressured by the rich to bend the halacha in favor of the rich. That just always happens, so that'll never stop. And the poor will appeal their way, and life was lived. Okay? Remember, the rich people not only have money. If you're rich in Poland, it means you have important contacts with Gentile officials. That's one of the ways of being rich. As the 16th century unfolded, this eventually developed that the Jews make a national parliament, just like the Poles do. Right? A national parliament where all the exact same thing. All the local kehilas, like I said before, Krakow and the 20, 30 villages under Krakow elect a certain number of delegates. The election is by the rich people in all those communities, the rich people in those communities, like it or not. Those delegates get together and they go to the national council held once or twice a year with instructions. Vote this way, vote that way. You understand? And this is how it went. And the result is that you see what's in front of you, which is what's called the Vad Arba Rotzos, the Council of Four Lands. I want to be very clear. You're going to learn something today that nobody knows. I mean, most people don't know. What you see in front of you is an actual map of what was called the Rzeczpospolita, which is the Republic of Poland and Lithuania, which was ruled over by a king, now elected king. What you see in front of you, therefore, is different colors, and they represent the constituent parts, part Poland, part Lithuania. I bet you've heard of the Vad Arba Rotzos. Most people have, in one form or another. And they think that that means that all the Jews on the map in front of you, this whole area of the old kingdom of Poland, got together and elected delegates to a national Jewish parliament. Not exactly. The lighter part on the map is the Polish part. The darker part on the map is the Lithuanian part. The Vad Arba Rotzos refers to the four parts of Poland, not to the Lithuania. Okay? So this is just a little detail, but it's important if you want to know history correctly. As you see in front of you, The four parts of Poland are the four parts of the lighter part. Now, the Jewish communities in Lithuania had their own vibe. Once in a while, they combine, and we call the Vad Chamesh Yahrtzeits. Not many people know about that. But usually, the Lithuanian part, which again is the dark part of the map in front of you, they ran their own show. The Jewish communities of Lithuania in the 1500s were led by the most important communities. Once upon a time, Vilna was not an important community. It developed. Brisk was the most important community, believe it or not, and Grodno, and eventually Vilna. They evolved their own parliament, which they called the Vad of Lithuania, Vad Halito. Now these Vads, who functioned for a couple hundred years, did a lot of things. Not just collect taxes for the king, although that was the main function. These Vads, they politic. In other words, they lobbied and bribed. That's how you had to live. They judged hard cases, like something a local bezdin couldn't deal with, or the people at the local level were, let's put it this way, two rich guys are fighting the local bezdin, afraid to get involved because they'll get killed by one side or the other. They kick it upstairs. Or there was some kind of psak issued by a local bezdin and was considered and was appealed. So at the national level, you have like an appeals court, the biggest rabbis. They licensed books and all kind of things like that. They settled disputes among communities, because who else can do that? In other words, it's a kind of a federal Jewish government. If you look at the next one on the list, it's a very famous book, or it will be now famous, by Shimon Dubna, where he published the Pinkas, the official record book of the Vad of Lithuania, meaning not the Vad Yahrtzeits of Poland. There's a separate volume about that. But there's a separate area called Lithuania, which you just saw on the map in front of you, which I repeat for the 100th time, is a lot bigger than the country of Lithuania today. And they ran their own show. You see? They ran their own government. Now, most interestingly, I would point out, they would legislate in a very practical way for the whole country, in a way to enable an actual society to function according to the din. Two examples come to mind. The heteriska comes from this. No, the heteriska system that we use today, that I think you know what I'm talking about, to enable people to charge an interest. But the Torah says you can't charge an interest, it has to be structured in a certain way. The actual forms that are used go back to the Vad Yahrtzeits and the Vad of Lita, when you had a situation like we have in America today, which is a big problem with Bezdins, and that is somebody writes a contract with a lawyer. You don't know what to look at. If you take it to Bezdin, you know what the Bezdin is going to do? They're going to interpret this contract in some arbitrary way, and neither the two people signing the contract in the first place and doing a business deal, whatever, had any idea what the Bezdin is, a totally arbitrary thing. They can't live like that, can't do business like that. The lawyers throw up their hands. So, if you really, really want the country to be such that everybody goes to Bezdin, not to the Gentile courts, you have to have some sort of a level playing field and a clear idea what the law is. And so they would legislate this sort of thing. And one of the big areas, as you can imagine, for contracts is iska. In other words, how do you deal with situations where you end up with a profit, especially if there's a loan involved. And according to the laws of interest, you can't have a profit unless it's structured in a certain way. And they devised, the SMA and then other people devised the formulas. They're used by all the communities in Poland, all the communities in Lithuania, and then two people doing business, Jews, know what they're dealing with. You know what I'm saying? Then it becomes clear, because every bezdin is going to follow these guidelines. That just gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. Another area, a very fascinating one, let's go to the next one, is problem with Shabbos guy. I don't mean the guy turning the lights in your house on Shabbos. I'm talking about you're a businessman, you own a business, you are Jewish, and you leased estates from the noblemen, and you run them, and therefore these peasants more or less belong to you for the duration of the lease, and your avadim are not allowed to work on Shabbos. On the other hand, the business has to run on Saturday, has to. The Polish guys demand it. And so how do you structure that? It's what we call today selling the business on Shabbos. How does that work? One guy does it this way, one guy does it this way. It's going to make a hefker rope, and they issued standard guidelines, or they constantly tried to issue standard guidelines to make life work. I might say that the Mechiras Chametz comes from now. For the same reason. Used to be that before Jews came to Eastern Europe, specifically Poland and Lithuania, Jews had nothing to do with booze. First of all, literally, in Central Europe and in Southern Europe, everything's coming from wine. Right? They don't have whiskey in Southern Europe. They have, wine, cognac, vermouth, I don't know, all those types of things. When it comes to Eastern Europe, they discover vodka and things like that. And they're chametz. Or are they? There was a whole discussion in 1569 because, as we'll see in a minute, and I've mentioned this in the past, Jews will corner the market and owning all the bars under the control of the magnates, or the noblemen. And what do you do if you have a large amount of booze for Pesach time? And they had to figure out a formula, which again they applied to the national level. And there's always people agree with, disagree, but they applied to the national level, which is the structure that we use today for selling the chametz without the chametz actually physically leaving anybody's property. So I'm just trying to tell you, it was a real life going on over there. Meanwhile, though, very important events were happening in Poland, Lithuania. Sigismund II, the second of those two kings, died childless. Who's going to take over after him? For hundreds of years, there was a single family that they ran the show. You know, the Yagelio family. So you know, have a stability. And when the father dies, they'll elect the son as a king. But now this guy died for all kind of reasons. Yeah, we call it the STD, you know. So all kind of reasons he didn't have kids. And who's going to take over? Sigismund himself, in his waning years, put together what they call the Union of Lublin, in which delegates from Poland and Lithuania, a lot of negotiations, politicking took place. But to cut to the chase, Poland and Lithuania agreed, after the death of this king, that they're going to unite not as two separate realms with the same king, but a single country, which I told you before, we call the Republic of Poland and Lithuania, Rzeczpospolita, the Republic, which will have a certain constitution, and that's how they'll operate from now on. The Lithuanians needed it more than the Poles because they were always under attack from the Russians. They wanted the Poles to help them against the Russians. But the Poles extracted concessions for this, and they worked it out. And one of the most important features of this was what they call the Golden Freedom, which is a hefkeris. That the Constitution now was written in such a way that the great lords, the magnates, controlled the show. The king be very weak. And it's what happened. Now from now on, they had the liberum veto. You can't pass a law in the parliament unless it's unanimous, which is crazy. But that way, you have absolute certainty that no law will ever be passed that the nobles don't like. Because any noble who says, I'm against it, you kill the law. Things like that. Now, how does it affect the Jews? From now on, Lithuania will be the junior partner. I told you they had to make concessions to get the Poles to agree with this. And they had to give away some karka. Some areas in eastern Lithuania, what we call today Ukraine, were now transferred to the Polish part. And other concessions were made. Was this good for the Jews? Bottom line is that from now on, from the late 1500s to the late 1700s, next 200 years, all power really took away from the crown and went to the magnates. The magnates are not the nobles, the big nobles, that's who they are. They own territory the size of Maryland. Really. You had a bunch of these guys in Poland and Lithuania. And they looked on the Jews who lived in their karka as their property, which they were. In other words, earlier, until now, the Jews were under the king. And if anybody messed with them, there was appeal to the king. But now, the king doesn't have so much power. And so whatever the formalities are, the fact is, if I'm Jewish, I live in Vilna, the whole Vilna belongs to a certain family. I forget what the name was. But the whole Vilna belonged to a certain family. The whole Lemberg belonged to a certain family. A ruler. No, the whole town is owned by somebody. You have to understand that. If that's the case, whatever you do, you better be right with this guy. Because he can literally either kick you out or kill you. And nothing will happen. So the Jews basically, after the death of Sigismund II, if you want to get down to it, become the slaves of the magnates. And there are a lot of other nobles that are smaller. They don't own an area like Maryland. They own an area like the Park Heights. It's also not tiny, but it ain't like Maryland, right? So in lots of those, they call them szlachta, the smaller gentry. These are the guys who have all the power in Poland. Not the king, and the middle class doesn't count. Now, what was the result of this? Interesting. The magnates, the great lords in other words, and the gentry who followed their cultural lead, this leads them to treat the Jews as these Jews belong to me. I own them. Okay, so what do you do with property that you own? Most of the time you treat it with care. Agree? Now, every once in a while, a guy could get drunk and bash his own car in if that's what he wants to do, right? If I would go out of my house, had too much to drink and pour him, if I would take a hammer and smash the windows in my car, I could do it. And these nobles also, every once in a while, something might happen, they might go crazy and just terrorize or kill the local subjects or Jews, whatever. But most of the time, that's not what happens. Most of the time, people want to take care of their own property. In the case of the Jews, by this time, late 1500s, the Jews, among not only were of service to the crown, but had engaged in the ethnic network wars that I spoke about in the past, and they'd won by now. The other ethnicities had been driven to the wall. So just to recap very briefly, I hope you remember this. Maybe I hope you don't remember it. Poland and Lithuania was a huge area, as you saw. It's full of natural resources, rivers, forests, fields of incredibly fertile soil, mines of iron and silver and gold and all kind of stuff. Tremendous amount of natural resources, behemoths, tremendous amount of natural resources. And the nobles owned it. So, what do you do with it? Well, you want to turn into money. How do you turn into money? I'm a noble. I'm not going to be a businessman. I live in a palace. Live a lifestyle of rich and famous. So I got to get people who will do the economic stuff for me to get me the money. And since the Poles didn't do it, they brought in foreign elements and different ethnic groups. The Jews were one. But there were also the Germans, the French, Italian, Scottish, Greek, Armenian. These are the ethnic groups who have business savvy, business inclination. For example, in America, it's no secret that you say the 7-Eleven is all like usually Pakistan or something like that. It's a natural ethnic kind of thing. Used to say in this country used to be the laundry's all Chinese. You know, nothing illegal about anything I just said. So this is the way it was. The Jews wanted to horn in on this, like everybody else did, and the guys who had the contracts were the nobles. Therefore, you had to go and make a situation where the nobleman wants you to get the contract and not your Scottish competitor, your Italian or German or Greek competitor. Greeks are hard to compete with the Armenians. They're very good businessmen. So the Jews had learned in a Darwinian world, survival of the fittest. And suffice it to say that what it means very simply is, let's take you have a magnate, a great nobleman. He owns a whole bunch of forests and stuff like that. So let's say there's a need for wood somewhere in Europe. And a businessman will come to him and say, I guess, I know that there's going to be a war somewhere, they're going to need wood for the Navy. In England, let's say, or France. And you have a nice kind of wood over here, the right kind of wood. So, let's make a deal. I'll organize this for you, and you'll get profit. I'll get a profit too. You have all these peasants, they work for you like slaves. Get them to chop down the wood, trim it down, put it on barges, and you own a river, or a couple guys own a river. And you float this stuff from central Poland or Lithuania up the rivers. Maybe you have to transport it a little bit, and you get it to the port. So just for argument's sake, you live in the Krakow area and you get it up to Danzig. And from Danzig, I can organize ships will transport the lumber to England. And because it's good lumber, the English will pay this and this much. And here the number is the bottom line, and your profit will be, let's say, for example, $1 million. The nobleman says, fine. So he gives the contract to the Scotsman. But then a Frenchman comes along and says like this, I can be more efficient and I can get you 1.1 million. Okay, then I'll give it to you. And then the German said, I can get you 1.3 million. You see where I'm going. Now the Jew, because he really is after competing, has nowhere else to go in Europe, so he goes, listen, I'll get you 2 million. I'll make $50,000 on it, unlike these other guys. You know? And no one said, well, that's a great deal. I'll take that. And little by little, the Jews, by undercutting, take a smaller profit, so they got all the business. Now, 50,000 is also money, you know. It's not like $250,000, but it's also money. And by the way, once you control the field, then you can get a better profit. This is the short way of what I mean when they say the Jews during the 15 and 1600s won the ethnic networking wars. And that means that they had made themselves the almost indispensable tools of the magnates. And they were the preferred tool of the magnates. The great prince or princess or duke or duchess that was all over Poland, Lithuania. The Jew would appear now almost always as the investor. You know, you're the duchess. I can advise you because I have contacts all over Europe. have the latest information, stock market stuff, and things like that. The best way to invest. They're the estate administrators. You own all this area, and peasants and land and things they said before. What's the best way of administering the lands and businesses that you own? The Jew will be the money manager. The Jew will be the broker, the exporter, the arendar, which means that the nobleman has all this stuff that he controls, and therefore he has a lot of franchises to sell if he wishes to. Somebody's going to own the bars. Somebody's going to own the hotels. Somebody's going to own the, to use American language, somebody owns the gas stations. You know what I mean? He owns all this stuff. Who would I give it out to lease it to? The Jew will be always the one who will go after those contracts, as we say, the arendas. Jew will be the tax collector. Most importantly, with the profanation, the right to sell booze and run the bars. This I talked about at great lengths a couple of years ago, so I don't want to chazer or whatever. You can only watch it on the earlier lectures, which is up now on my YouTube website, YouTube channel, the Jews and the Poles. But let me put it this way: the Polish, it became part of the culture that the magnates are like this. I can't give the right to run a bar with all that booze to a local who'll drink it. Jews don't drink. Right? Jews don't drink. The Jew will be looking from a capitalist perspective, and therefore will run the business from the best capitalist perspective. So by the time we're finished this process, all the bars everywhere are run by Jews, which is unique in Europe. And we're talking about what developed into not just a bar, but in Europe, it's a Polish institution. It's a bar, it's also a 7-Eleven, it's also a Best Western, and that sort of thing. A whole bunch of things combined into one. Didn't necessarily smell well, but that's how life was lived. Now, that means that the Jews made themselves valuable, almost indispensable, to the guys that had the power. And at the same time, there was a king, so they continue to raise money for the king, right? No, the fact that they're serving the magnates and the locals doesn't mean that they don't have to pay taxes to the crown. In fact, for the king, the Jews were an assured source of revenue for the emasculated monarchs, who were always starved for funds for the army and the bureaucracy, because the magnates didn't want to give the king much power. The magnates are always working, how should I put it over here, to make sure the king doesn't get too powerful and take away any of their privileges. Each one of these magnates is like a little king in his area, or a queen. And so, from the perspective of the kings of Poland, I like the Jews, right? Because why not? The Jews always pay taxes even though they belong to the magnates. It says, if I'm king, I don't have too many sources of revenue. One of the sources of revenue, a nice source of revenue, is the Jews. So therefore, the kings like the Jews. Let's go to the one about the kings of Poland. Get that one right. And so you see the three kings who were elected monarchs during the period we're talking about. On the right, on the left to right is Stefan Batory, and then it was Sigismund III, and then Vladislav. These are not famous to you, but they were staunchly Catholic, but nevertheless they protected the Jews. It's interesting, because the Jews were a plus for them. So the Jews, therefore, in Poland in the late 1500s and the first half of the 1600s, have a strange golden age. Under the golden freedom, which was what the fact that the magnates had all their privileges, the enemy of the Jews, which is the middle class, was deprived of any influence or power. You understand what I'm saying? Because of the way the politics developed, all the power went to the huge nobles. So the middle class had no political say. So from the narrow perspective of the Jews, that's good, because the middle class are their sworn enemies. So they can say to the nobles, you're doing a terrible thing, you're allowing the Jews to have economic freedom, they're going to dominate the economy, they're going to own all the stores, all the rest of it. Magna does not care. Doesn't care about the middle class. Alright? So they couldn't hurt the Jews, the Polish middle class, as they wished. It was a strange golden age because the Jews were what you call, what's the right word? Unintended beneficiaries. Collateral beneficiaries of a situation. The middle class, which was one of their two big enemies, had been deprived of power by the magnates. The Catholic Church was powerful, and under the Jesuits, as I was saying, were undergoing a very interesting process of turning Poland into a super Catholic country. little by little, one way or the other, the Jesuits did get all the non-Catholic Poles to become Catholic. And so they had a lot of power and they controlled the king and so forth. Nevertheless, the exception was the Jews. The Catholic Church was not successful. The priests and the Jesuits and the archbishops were not successful in getting the position of the Jews to be undone. Instead, the kings and the magnates listened to the Musar schmoozes of the Catholic preachers and priests, and they nodded gravely at the criticisms that were leveled against them by the clergy. How can you let the Jews who killed Jesus and all this have such a power in our country? But then they proceeded to completely ignore them and continue to privilege their Jews. That's the strange way life was lived. And this is very unusual because the era of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, when the Catholic was so strong in every other country in Europe, the Catholic Church at that time was successful in really persecuting the Jews, censoring the books, putting them in ghettos, forbidding them to have children, all kinds of terrible xeris, residential restrictions, all kinds of restrictions, and not in Poland, not in Lithuania. It's not because the magnates were liberal, it's because they were capitalists. Now, the danger, of course, is whatever happens if the middle class ever gets power. Nothing to worry about. In the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, for better or worse, for the 13th century, the middle class didn't have any power. The magnates controlled everything, and therefore the Jews were safe. The middle class didn't get power until the late 19th, early 20th century. Then the Jews were in trouble. Then there was hell to pay. But for the period we're talking about, the people who set the style of life were the great magnates, and the Jews are part of the furniture. Right? Because really Jews were part of life in Poland and Lithuania in a way that was unthinkable elsewhere. I just told you the Jews had the bars, the inns. No such thing is possible anywhere else in Europe. There's no bar run by a Jew in Western Europe, in England, in France, in Germany, in Italy, Holland, none of those places. Those things are reserved for Christians. Most economic activity were reserved by law for Christians. In Poland, the Jews operated every level of the economy. It's basically de facto. There was no area of economic enterprise that was denied them. And therefore, Jews have, always under the control of the magnate, a constant presence, even a sort of dominating presence in this part of Europe, which is extraordinary. The fascinating thing is, the Jews in these centuries, 1500s, 1600s especially, were not really looked down upon as a kind of low-class, manual labor, dumb proletariat. That role was the peasants. They were denominated the poor white trash of that time. The Jews, by contrast, were viewed as a almost constituent foreign element. They're not Polish, they're not Lithuanian, they're always here though. They're a foreign element. Especially, as I said, we're not the only foreign element, especially in Lithuania. And a group that is just good at economics and administration and turning stuff into money through economic enterprise, particularly through exports. No, it's not the Jews are cheaters and this kind of thing. You put a Jew in charge and he knows how to run a business. You put a Jew in charge, he knows how to get money out of an estate. Put a Jew in charge, he knows how to introduce efficiencies. That's a set of economic skills that call forth respect and not contempt. So Lithuania and Poland were the only places in Europe or elsewhere at that time where the Jews were not looked down upon in contempt. And this made the Jews very proud. I would even say strutting, as I said before. Let's go to the next one. You have the famous description, again from the Yevei Metzul, written in the 1650s. All the Jews would go to Atlantic City, shall we say, in Zaslav, the great fair, of all the merchants get together. And Yaroslav, these are two different places in Poland. Lublin. But Shoma, and they would get together from all over the place. They had thousands of Jews, maybe more. And that's where people switched to yeshivas. That was the system. If you're learning in Tells, now you want to switch to Punovich, you wait till you get to Atlantic City or to Las Vegas, whenever the fair is held, and that's where you do the official switching. And so not only did the businessmen and the merchants all show up in great numbers, because that's where you handle with each other. Let's say I'm in the silk trade. I go to the great fair, and I find other people who are in the silk trade, and they have what to sell and what to buy, and that's where you handle, because it's not like there's Amazon at that time. And Kam Rivers and all the yeshivas came there, because that was a happening. So one could do a movie or a play, be a good play for high school, to be at the Yerid in Lithuania or Poland in the 15, 16, 1700s, and one of these great fairs of once upon a time, economic fairs. And you see thousands of Jews and relatives and their friends and enemies. And since that was a happening place, all the Rosh Yeshiva showed up there with the Bnei Yeshiva. There's all the Yeshiva students came there, and there were hundreds of Rosh Yeshivas, he says, Kamalov and Bachur, thousands of Tiu Bachur, Kam Rivas, Nar Masochim Yehudim, and tens of thousands, that's exaggeration. There's a vast number of regular Jews and high school students, a lot of Gentiles, as he says, because people came from all over the place to participate in these fairs. That's where all the shidduchim happened, because any father with a son or a daughter eligible age who came there, because that's where the people are, that's where the boys are, that's where the girls are, right? There you can find, with all these thousands of people, you'll find the right match. And hundreds and sometimes thousands of shidduchim were made at these things. So it's a happening like you've never seen in your life. There's the business stuff happening, there's the yeshiva hak happening in vast amounts, and there's the shidduchim stuff happening in vast amounts. It's a Jewish, a frenzy, This is the point I want to show you. And the Jews walked around dressed to the nines. Now, of course, the girls are going to go around dressed to the nines. You can just imagine, the mothers and the grandmothers that they do today. The meat market, in other words, everybody dressed real like a Florida or something like that, in these hotels, but by the thousands, and the boys also, and they dressed up to the nines. In other words, it was Poland. There was no legal prohibition against Jews dressing well, as there was everywhere else, because the Jews were considered chashuv. They were considered important by the Gentiles. Right? They were an important economic class. They're not Polish, they're not Christian, that's all true. But they're not schleppers or peasants or anything like that. And the Jews were vast, as many as the sands of the seas. In other words, it was large, life was really hawking, as we'd say there. Now, this extreme pride in being Jewish became an integral component of the identity of Lithuanian Jews. That's why the Lithuanian Jews, among other things, will be famous in history, being extremely proud of being Jewish, and particularly in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, where there were so many illiterates among the peasant population. Jew automatically feels I'm a cultured person. It's not like I'm surrounded by no society and I'm tempted to join that society. The opposite. There's no interest, no attraction, no temptation to join the other society, because I live in an elite society. This is the formation of what we call Litvak mentality. But it certainly was the source of power and frumkeit, and from Judaism flourished along with the inevitable abuses of power. There were a ton of Sfarim written at that time. It's a highly literate, intellectually productive community, works of deep scholarship and works of popular scholarship, a lot of Yiddish books written for the women, for the masses. And the old system of what we call base medrash scholars, even people don't go to yeshiva, you just learn in your local shul, and convachsois, you become a great Talmud Chacham, and some of the most famous rabbis of Jewish history never stepped foot in yeshiva. They just, learned up on their own in their own base medrash, or two guys would team up with each other from two different towns, and it would be a super chavrusa team, and would finish Shas and poskim and become great gedolim. And the yeshivas also flourished, and all this therefore ensured that all during the 1600s and the 1700s, a steady stream of Lithuanian and Polish scholars would occupy the seats of the major Jewish communities elsewhere in Central and Western Europe. He told me the names of the big rabbis in the 1700s in Germany, in France, in Holland, in a place like that. A huge number of them come from Poland and from Lithuania. I could just get tired naming them. Tzemach Tzedek, the Shach, the Shagasai, the Noda Yehuda, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of names. You understand? A whole bunch of Daflo, just a whole bunch of names. And what's the idea? Because in Poland, there's like a ton of these learners. And as I said before, if you have a big quantity, you end up producing a top stratum that has quality. And they got big reputations, and therefore they can occupy positions in important communities that are outside of Poland. So the magnates and the nobles, I told you again, didn't mind. They always had total control if they wished. So nothing was happening without their okay. Basically, no rabbi or communal official could get elected by a Jewish community without the consent of the nobleman, which means he had to pay him off. This was part of the regular revenues income of any nobleman, of any magnate. They have so many Jewish communities, and every time they elect somebody official, he gets a bribe. On the other hand, although the nobles were sometimes tempted to try to force their candidate on the community would passively resist. It wouldn't be a good shidduch, and it wouldn't be a comfortable situation for the nobleman or the community. If he wanted to, he could do whatever he wanted. But if the people don't like the rabbi, the community doesn't function well, then the revenue doesn't come in the way he wants. And so, the result would be that like a balance of power, and basically a community had to elect somebody who was acceptable to the kehillah, but also acceptable to the nobleman. I mean, that's what it boils down to. It's also true, by the way, to be honest, that the Jews picked up a lot of superstition and witchcraft stuff from the peasants and others in this Poland-Lithuanian society. And a lot of the Jewish practices that our ancestors brought from Eastern Europe are definitely not Maimonidean. As you can see in some of the famous books by Dr. Zimmels over here about magicians, theologians, and doctors, and the famous book by the Reformed Rabbi, Jewish Magic and Superstition, there's a lot of, superstitions that Jews picked up and became part of Jewish lore as the result of living in these areas over there. That happens. For these reasons, the years before 1648, up to 1648, seemed great for the Jews as well as great for the Lithuanians and Poles. But history is a dialectical process. Every action brings a reaction. Under the Treaty of Lublin that I spoke about before, when the two countries united into one country, the Rzeczpospolita of Lithuania and Poland, territory from Lithuania was transferred to Poland. Ukrainian territory shifted from Lithuanian to Polish control. And the great magnates over there, Polonized, they switched to Polish, they became Catholic, and then they sought to pressure the peasants whom they owned to become Catholic and speak Polish the way they did. Now in other words, they harshly imposed their magnate power, their rule, over the Ukrainians, who were the peasants, and they often used the Jews as estate managers and arendars in various capacities. We've talked about this before when we did about the Kazakh Uprising. This is what caused it. So the guy who owns the whole area is some magnate who lives in a castle. But if you're Ukrainian, the guy who has the keys to the church, and the guy who owns the bar, and the guy who you have to see in order to get your bread milled, and 100 other things, is the local Jew. And this was very infuriating to the Ukrainians. First of all, the taxes and imposts were harsh and were experienced as persecution. The nobleman would say, 1 day a week you have to work for me. Or now I changed my mind, 2 days a week you have to work for me, or 3 days. And no, they're not get paid. I'm doing my stuff. And the peasants don't like that. And the guy who's coming and telling you have to work and administering is a Jew. And the fact that these people, the Ukrainians, were, what should I say, under the Jews, that the Jews who killed Jesus stood higher on the totem pole, that these accursed Jews, cursing Jews is a big part of Eastern Christianity, Eastern Orthodoxy, and that they lived better than we, the Ukrainians, did. This robbed the poor white trash of any ability to be not the lowest rung on the society because we're lower than the Jews and it's our own country. So in other words, in the South, in American history, what they used to call the poor whites, the poor white trash, at least they're like this, at least we're white, the blacks are under us because of the racist system that used to be in the South. But here, it's like you say, it's as if you took the blacks and you said, I guess they're going to run the poor whites. That really drove them crazy in Lithuania, and that's how the great Ukrainian Uprising and invasion broke out in 1648. Now, I've spoken about at great length in the past. I'm not going to go to that length now. Khmelnytsky's Uprising in 1648. All we remember is that it was very bloody, that the Kazakhs, who were the Ukrainians, came and killed a ton of Jews and Poles, tortured them in various ways. I don't want to hazard it over there. If you're interested in the gory details, I think it's up online, right? I believe it's up online. Cossacks and Jews, you can see it. My old videos. And vice versa. The Poles then did it to them. So it was an incredibly bloody period. I always like to show this piece over here, this short segment from the movie Fire and Sword, which is the famous novel from Sienkiewicz, which describes in great detail the Khmelnytsky Uprising, written by a Pole, of course. It's like they're Gone with the Wind. And the Polish prince, now before I show you this in a second, just take a second, is the famous Yermia Vishnevetsky, who became the defender against the Cossacks, and he killed them in a bloody way. He said, I'm going to drown this rebellion in blood. You'll see in a second. And he was a protector of the Jews. And what should I say over here? He is representative of the fact that both sides are going to engage in massacres. Okay? That's the way it goes. He talks about protecting the Jews.
Wasza książęconość, weźmiesz 300 dragonów, księżnę, dwór, rodziny szlacheckie i Żydów, odprowadzisz do lamości. Wracaj natychmiast. Tutaj każda szabla będzie się liczyła. Dokąd mam wrócić, wasza książęconość? Ja, Jeremi Wiśniewiecki, wojewoda ruski, książę na Łudniach i Wiśniowcu. Przysięgam Tobie, Boże Święty, w Trójcy Świętej Jedynej, i Tobie, Matko Najświętsza, jako podnosząc tę szablę przeciwko państwu, Bóg jej nie złożę, póki Ukrainy nie uspokoi i buntów chłopskich we krwi nie Tobie. Tak mi, Panie Boże, dopomóż.
And this happened. So if you're Jewish and you're living over there, wait a minute, yeah. You look at this map, as you can see, the darker part is where the Cossacks were, where the fighting was, and it includes Lithuania as well as Poland. You understand? By now I expect you to understand the map a little bit. So the right side, most of that is what they call Lithuania. So the Cossack massacres and the Polish counter-massacres do take place in an area where there were large important Jewish communities. Right? So I'm just trying to locate this incident within the broader context of our story today. The Vod of Lithuania was then overwhelmed by the flood of refugees. And things got worse even. There's an excellent book that just came out, an excellent book. I just got it here. Where did I put it? Yeah. I don't know if anybody's watching this is interested in this, by Professor Teller, who's a very good historian, called Rescue the Surviving Souls. It's exactly about the refugee crisis and the aftermath. It's fascinating that emerges from over here. A lot of your relatives come from this area. All of a sudden, the Vod of Lithuania first says, let's try to get tzedakah and to help the people. But so many thousands show up, and then things get worse because there comes what they call the potop, the Mabul. And when Lithuania and Poland got invaded after this, because they were weakened by the Cossack Uprising, by Sweden, and then Russia, and then Brandenburg, and for 25 years, the Republic, the Rzeczpospolita, went through terrible times, the like of which were unprecedented. You've been here now in this course. Poland was never invaded in this way at all. And the Jews therefore suffered along with everybody else. Many Lithuanian Jews moved west, to Bohemia, to France, to Alsace, to Amsterdam, to Germany, which was now recovering from the 30 Years' War. So a lot of you who think you're Yankees, maybe, but it's also very possible, you come from Lithuania, into broader Lithuania, and ran there in the 1600s and afterwards, running away from the terrible times that Poland went through. Many, many Jews were sold as slaves by the Tatars and end up all over the world. It's just a sad story. It was a nightmare for the Agunas. It was a nightmare for disappeared members of the families. Again, if this interests you at all, this book just came out. This is the book on the subject. He goes through it all in detail. And Jewish life was ripped apart. A lot of women, I'll just give an example. A lot of them were carried off by the Tatars, sold as slaves, and ended up in somebody's harem. That's just it. Get over it. You know, that's the way it goes. How does somebody from Lithuania end up in an Iranian harem? It's easy. It's called the 1600s, you know. And they never returned home. But then things went back to normal after 1672, particularly when the Poles then elected a Polish guy as king, not some foreigner guy. This is King John Sobieski, who defeated the enemies of Poland, especially the Turks, and restored the country, and was a great friend of the Jews. So the same thing happened. He's a strong Catholic. He himself was the son of a magnate. Actually, he wasn't. The son of regular gentry. But he's a strong Catholic, but he's in favor of the Jews. Okay? Basically, life had no choice but to return to normal. That's the way it went. There wasn't such a thing as traumatic, post-traumatic syndrome, and is there reparations and all. None of that exists. You just pick up where you left off. You had no choice. Polish, Lithuanian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, Jews, they simply had to pick up the pieces, and life had to move on. Your wife is gone, your father's gone, your brother's gone, this and the other. It's like that. But the position of the Jews after this would be lower in society, because the Jews were now seen as the tools of the magnates, which they were, and the public in Poland, if we can speak of that, was stuck with the magnates, but they resented their selfish domination of everything in the realm, and they came to despise the Jew, because they said, look, in a normal country, the Christians would dominate the economy, but in our dysfunctional country, the Jews is used by the magnates to prevent a normal economy from emerging. But it was clear to all that for the present, all the power was going to continue to be held by the magnates, whether you like it or not, and that the throne would be weak, right? The kings would be deliberately kept weak, which meant, by the way, Poland had the lowest taxes in the world. Even the Jews had to pay double, triple taxes than everybody else, still less than they had to pay in other countries. That's interesting, okay? But no one realized at that time, perhaps, just how weak and how dysfunctional. Because when this guy died, the Poles were incredibly stupid and selfish, the magnates. And instead of electing another Pole like him, who would be good for the country, they allowed themselves to be bribed. Let's go to the next one. To the two Saxon kings. The guy on the left is Augustus the first. The guy on the right is Augustus the second. Or maybe it's Augustus the second and third, doesn't matter. And these were princes of Germany. They just want to be kings of Poland. They were completely incapable. They were Sybaritic. Augustus on the left is famous for having 375 illegitimate children, right? Out of 900 and some mistresses. This is a claim to fame, you understand? And the son was even worse, meaning more of a doofus. And that means the country went to hell in the sense of a government. Now, if you're a magnate, it's not going to hell at all. Everything's great. No government to bother me running my lone estates the way I want to run it. I own Delaware, and I'm running Delaware the way I feel like it. I own Rhode Island. I'm running Rhode Island the way I feel like it. This is how life was lived. How did Augustus become king? They plain and simple. No, let's go to the previous one. If you look at the bottom, you'll see, you can't see very well, that's what the Constitution called for open elections. There would be in a field, and all the big shots and electors in Poland would get together, wherever was designated. And you could come and bribe them. And the way Augustus got elected was he raised more money than anybody else, and they brought the money in cash to the field. They took it in 20s. And what's famous is he got a Jew to do it. Let's go to the next one. If you're my age, you'll remember the books from Marcus Lehman, the teenage books. One of them is called The Royal Resident. Maybe you've seen this. What's it all about? About Baron Lehman, who was the court Jew of Augustus, who raised the cash to buy the election to be king of Poland. Now, the government, therefore, in the 1700s was extremely dysfunctional. All the other countries are in rings around Poland. Armies marched through back and forth. The magnates only cared about their own dollar-damas. Now, they weren't bad to the Jews. By the 18th century, the Jews, under the magnates, controlled the whole economy of Lithuania and Poland. There are plus and minus to it. I mentioned in the past that by this time, you simply have to understand the whole kingdom of Lithuania and Poland was one giant flea market. That's what it was. Wherever you went, in every town, in every village, there are Jews. There are others also, but mainly Jews. And it's pure capitalism. I'm walking the street. I'm hodling 24/7. I got a hold of a bunch of combs. Now I have to figure out what to do with the combs. Then I meet you. You know some things. but you say you have some silk. So how can we work out that I, sell the combs and get silk and make a profit on it, and transport it this place to the other? Another guy has leather. Another guy has old comic books. Whatever you want. It was a pure capitalism, and it flourished. That's the funny part. Even though people say it's terrible, the magnate gets his cut at the top. And every place you went in Poland and Lithuania was like a marketplace. In the marketplace, it was one big flea market. But even in the houses, people were buying and selling all the time. And let me put it this way. You tell me what a synagogue was like in Poland in 1720, anywhere, Shabbos morning. You know the old story, Nicht auf Shabbos Gerät. But that's really what life was all the time. Every day in Shul, you're hawking and all the rest of it. And I got land, and he got this, and he got this, and I know a guy who does this, and that, and the other. And the funny part is, it kind of flourished, which is why when you go to Poland and Lithuania, in these areas today, after the Second World War, a lot of things were destroyed. The towns are actually well built. It's surprising. You go there, you see architecture from the old days. The pure capitalism worked in the sense of enterprise zones, because that's what these were. You understand what I'm saying? People made money, didn't make money. It enabled urban development and even a certain amount of social engineering, civil engineering. It's actually quite an interesting story. So, this is the way life was lived. If you're Jewish, like the Gemara says in Yevamos, don't invest in karka, keep everything in iska, everything is liquid all the time, and you're handling every single day. On the other hand, listen closely, the Jews underwent a baby boom. And there were 650,000 Jews in Lithuania and Poland by 1770. And that meant that there were too many Jews for the economy to handle it. Here we deal with something we run with now. A lot of these revolutions that happen in modern times is because the overpopulation created a situation in which there aren't jobs and not enough money. To use language that perhaps you will understand better, there's one day school in town and there's enough money to support the one day school. But if there's a whole lot of kids being born, then it'll overwhelm the day school. So you have to set up another one or another one. And that'll cause duplication, and it'll cause all kinds of problems. There may be that the institution of the community are not big enough or designed to handle the population increase. On the other hand, it's a good thing to have more children and more Jews, but, it's going to be poverty because the economic situation wasn't one that can handle such a quick rise in the population. Now, which is just interesting. And the magnates, if they wanted to, could be crazy, could be Caligulans. There's a very famous story, we're approaching the end. There's a very famous story by Solomon Maimon. It's called the Autobiography of Solomon Maimon. He was a famous person in philosophy. He's a Lithuanian Jew, went off to Derech, as we say today, and went to Germany, became a libertine, and he wrote a very famous autobiography, died at a young age, in the 1790s. And this is him on the left, and he's talking about the magnate, Prince Radziwill, very well known. Big Lithuanian Polish family, super duper. And this guy owned, like I say, Maryland or something like that. Really, really did. He had a private army, just for a shtick of 10,000 men. More than the King of Poland. But they're mainly there for marching up and down, right? That's what he wasted money in incredible ways. And he could get drunk. And Solomon Maimon, who grew up in a little town in Lithuania, describes what it was like. Let's go to the next thing. He said, the Polish nation, which had comprehended the Polish nobility, meaning Poland, and it means Lithuania here, means only the nobles, is of a very mixed kind. Only a few have an opportunity of culture by means of upbringing, instructions, and travel, which they can promote their own welfare. So most of these guys are rich and spoiled, and they're not educated, the magnates. Most of them, on the other hand, spend their lives in ignorance, immorality, and become the sport of their extravagant passions, which are ruinous to their tenants. Because like I said before, if I want to, I just go and break every window in the house in the town that I own, if I want to. They make a display with titles and orders which they disgrace by their actions. This is an 18th century verbiage. They own many estates, and they don't know how to manage them. And they're a perpetual feud with one another, so the kingdom must become the prey of its neighbors or envious of its greatness. Prince Radziwill, who's the guy we're talking about, was a hetman, meaning a big shot, in Poland and in Lithuania. One of the greatest magnates, an occupant of 3 inheritances, his family owned immense estates. He was not without a certain kindness of heart and good sense. He wasn't basically a bad guy. But through neglected training and want of instruction, meaning because he had no education, he became one of the most extravagant princes who ever lived. Because he had no occupation, because what do you do all day long? Which was a consequence of neglecting cultivating his taste and widening his knowledge. He gave himself up to booze, by which he was tempted the most ridiculous and insane actions. Without any particular inclination for it, he abandoned himself to the most shameful sensuality. And without being cruel, he exercised towards his dependents the greatest cruelty. He had his own army of 10,000 men, which he used for no purpose except display. And during the rise of the Confederates, that we don't have to worry about. Let's go to the next paragraph. No, right there. Who can describe the excesses he perpetrated? A few examples will be sufficient to give an idea. A certain respect for my former prince doesn't allow me to consider his faults as anything faults of temperament, but because of rather his bad education. When he passed through the street, which he commonly did with the whole pomp of his court, see, he owned towns, he owned villages. He feels like traveling through. His bands of music and soldiers, no man dared show himself in the street. Oh, you can say, he's pulling a gun and shoot you just for fun. And even the house of people were known by no means safe. The poorest, dirtiest peasant woman who came in his way, he would order up into his carriage beside himself, no, and rape her. Once he was sent for a respectable Jewish barber. Now, your barbers used to be the surgeons also. They did the bloodletting. Who suspected nothing, but he was wanted for some surgical operation. He brought his instruments and appeared before the prince. Do you have your instruments with you? Yes, I do, Serene Highness. Give me the lancet. I want to open your veins. The prince said, I want to play doctor today. And the poor barber had to submit. The prince seized the lancet and knows the needle. And he didn't know how to go about the operation, obviously. And his hand trembled because he was drunk. Of course, he wounded the barber in a pitiable manner. But the courtiers all around him smiled their applause and praised his skilled surgery, because they're flunkies. He went into a church, and being so drunk, he didn't know where he was. He stood against the altar, and he commenced to relieve himself. All who were present were horrified. Next day, when he was sober, the clergy brought this to his mind, the misdeed he committed the day before. Oh, said the prince, we'll make that good. So you should have commanded to the Jews to provide at their own expense 50 stone of wax for burning in the church. The poor Jews were therefore obliged to bring a sin offering for the desecration of a Christian church by a Catholic Christian. He took it into his head to drive on a wall around the town. But the wall was too narrow. He never drove in any other than the 6 horses. So his hussars, his soldiers, were obliged to carry the coach with their hands until he drove around the town this way. Once he drove with the palm to a Jewish synagogue, and without anyone to this day knowing the reason, he committed the greatest havoc, smashed the windows and stoves, broke all the vessels, threw on the ground a Sefer Torah, kept in the ark, and so forth. A learned, pious Jew ventured to lift one of the copies of the Torah, in other words, to pick up a Sefer Torah from the ground, and he was struck by a musket ball. No, he shot him, right? Simply because he felt like it. From here, the train went to a second shul, where the same conduct was repeated, and they went to the cemetery, where the buildings were demolished, and the matzebas were cast into the fire, and so forth, right? So you get the general idea. And by the way, the rest of the time he was good to the Jews. You see what I'm saying? So being under the arbitrary control of these guys had its ups and downs, to say the least. Okay, now not all the magazines were that. Usually weren't like that, but you never know. There are a ton of stories along these lines, and that's what life was lived like. The last king of Poland, who you see in front of you, Stanisław Poniatowski, who was a Lithuanian but Polish by culture, was an improvement by Poland, but it's not so Pasha for the Jews. He's the last king. In simple term, by this time in the middle 1700s, the non-magnates wanted to fix the situation. They tried to recover a say in national affairs, and it was also the Enlightenment era, the 18th century. So they sought to introduce rational reforms into Poland and Lithuania to make the country more normal, more Western, to have a real central government. At this point, one of the questions, they dealt with a lot of questions. One of them is the Jews. What do you do about the Jews who were so un-Polish and so fecund, they had so many children? How do you integrate the Jews into Polish society, not just as the anomalous tools of the magnates and the gentry? How do you deal intelligently, because it's the Enlightenment, with the problem of the Jews? The first thing the Polish parliament did in this mood was to abolish the yahrtzeits. Abolish that. Because he says the government with the government will tax them directly. But what's going to replace the yahrtzeits? This was the situation around 1770, but none of it mattered. Because within a short time, Poland was about to be partitioned and disappear as a country. Poland was about to end. Okay? the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was about to be annexed 2 years later to Tsarist Russia with the profoundest negative consequences. Before I close, I'm going to pick up the narrative next time with Lithuania, a Russian province, rather than a proud, independent state, a Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Let me make one striking observation. If you've been with me these last 2 lectures, you will notice every single king of Lithuania had been a friend of the Jews, and certainly not a Jew hater. Everyone. Now switching to Russia. Every single Tsar of Russia was a Jew hater. Every single one. So life was about to get tough for the Jews, as well as the Lithuanians, in an unprecedented way. Welcome to Eastern Europe, where unlike the West, the narrative is not progressive. It doesn't get better as time goes on. It actually gets worse. This is a story we'll pick up next time. With that, I bid you a good night.